You know, if there's one question I get asked more than any other, more even than why is there an expiration date on sour cream if it's already sour? That question would have to be, Mark, with your background and experience with Nikon cameras, haven't you got quite a few of them now? How many do you actually need? Well, today we are going to try and answer that question. Yes, it's getting pathological. This is the third of my videos where I have to pack away my cameras and lenses to move house. Check out the others for my broken cameras and film zoom point and shoots. Today we're focusing on my Nikon film SLRs. We've got a lot to get through, so let's press on with our Nikon, shall we? All right, let's start with this one. So here's a question for you. This is the Nikon EM, and is this the worst film camera that Nikon ever produced? Look, a lot of people claim so. They certainly went bargain basement on this one. Everything feels a little bit cheap. I have two of them. One of them is already packed away, and yes, it's because it's broken. Light leaks it had, I managed to fix those, but it was also skipping frames. Look, it's a good enough camera that I'm hanging on to the other one for parts for this, even though I'll probably never be able to repair it. It's a very simple camera. In a sense, it's one of those things that you just can't go wrong with. It's aperture priority only. You'll notice that there are no real dials or buttons on it other than the bulb mode, the manual 90, and the auto mode. Of course, what that does mean is that if you don't have batteries in this, it's not going to work. Look, like I said, it's a good camera because it's kind of idiot-proof, mainly. It is my daughter's main choice of a camera. She actually has the next camera, but kind of prefers to use this one. One other neat little thing about this, which she likes, is it does beep to tell you when you're either under or overexposed, which with aperture priority does make a difference because sometimes you're not really aware if you're going either too wide or if you're going a little bit too small with that aperture. Look, let's cleanse our palette now with a classic camera, the Nikon FE ×2. And look, what a beautiful matching pair they are. A silver one and a black one. Like the EM, this is aperture priority, but it can also do manual, so you've got a lot more power here. You've got your manual ISO, you've got exposure compensation, you've got your shutter speeds all the way up to 1,000th of a second. Yes, it's an electronic camera, so unless you're setting it to M90, if you want to use all of those shutter speeds, you do need to have a battery in there, but it takes standard LR44s. This is a very solid camera. Mine have had a couple of issues over time. This silver one had a problem where, yes, you could wind it on, take a photo, but sometimes when you came to wind it on next time, you wouldn't get that tension. It just wouldn't engage with the mechanism, and you'd have to do that a couple of times before you could actually take a picture. This one has now been fixed. This one has another little problem. This one really is about when you come to open the door. See how you've got that little tab there, and you have to rotate that tab before you can open it. So this tab has a tendency to just swirl around the dial. I'm very worried that this actually might break at some point. I don't take this traveling with me anymore because of that, but it's a beautiful camera. I still use it occasionally, and I am keeping it, and I will definitely try and get it fixed if it ever actually really stops working. And this one looks particularly nice with the Nikon Series E 50mm f1.8 lens on it. A lens that got a lot of hate when it first came out as well. It came out with the EM. It was seen as a cut down and cheap version, but optically it's really quite nice and quite a bargain lens to buy these days. Although I think most people have now realized that any Nikon lens is going to be a good lens, and it doesn't really matter whether it's a Series E lens or not. Now, a step up in some respects and a step down in others, and yes, I do have two of them. The Nikon FG. This is not a camera that many people talk about as classic Nikons, but it's kind of a classic to me. I love the Nikon FG. I'm just going to be honest about it. It is just so damn cute. This introduced program mode to the world, everything you need from a camera. It controls your shutter speed as well as your aperture. It also is aperture priority and it's completely manual as well. This was the first camera to have TTL flash capability and it's got a standard hot shoe. So it takes flashes like the SB15 or the SB23, which is the one that I have. The key feature of that flash and the key feature of this camera is that it is small and it is compact. It is not light though. So I talked about it as a step up in many respects and a step down in a couple. Why is it a step down? Well, it's mainly because it uses an LED in the viewfinder. Now that's great in low light shooting. You can actually see what shutter speed you're at. But the other thing about it that's really annoying is that LED just flashes at you until you hit frame 1. So you cannot compose and you can't auto expose until you do that. Now that's really annoying for a cheap person like me because I like to pretty much shoot from frame 0. So I end up having to either Sunny 16 it or take a manual reading and then set it to shoot manually, at least until I hit frame 1. That's just one of those real annoyances and it just doesn't have to be there. One of the things that other people have complained about it, but again, I quite like because particularly if I give it to my family, it does beep when you're over or underexposed. But the thing about this is that you can turn that off here through this little switch. So you can get rid of that minor annoyance. If it's an annoyance to you, I don't mind it unless I'm actually trying to shoot discreetly. This doesn't worry me. Look, one of the things about this too is that this does work with your AFD lenses. Now the AFD lenses are the ones, if you remember, they're autofocus, but they're screw drive. They can work manually with them as with your normal manual lenses. Look, if you want to have a look and see how I managed to wrangle this with an AFD lens, check out my video where I took it to Colombo with my 28-105mm lens. Yes, there were some pretty bad shots in that one, but that was user error, not a problem of the lens or the camera, just a problem with me. Let's move on to the first of the autofocus cameras, and that is my Nikon N2020, which is here. And I know it's here because it is probably one of the most distinctive of my cameras. This is the Nikon F501 in most markets. Obviously, this is the American version. And what this basically is an F301, but with autofocus. Now, I have done a review of this one. I love the retro styling of this camera. I mean, look at it. It looks and screams like it's from the 1980s, specifically an episode of Knight Rider. It's got that black chunky form. It's got the little red line on it. This is absolutely classic and it's perfect if you can't afford a Nikon F3, which is probably the big brother to this. Now, I will say that even though this is an autofocus camera, the autofocus is annoying, but it works great with manual lenses. And that's one of the really key aspects about this. A lot of autofocus cameras will have a dot that tells you when you're in focus, when you're using a manual lens. This doesn't just have that. It has a couple of arrows each side, so you know whether you're forward or back focusing. So it makes focus that little bit easier, that little bit quicker. I like this camera. About the only really annoying thing is that if I've got it this way and I want to take a picture, because it's got auto wind on, I press the button and for some reason this scrapes against my nose. Is that the fault of the camera? Is it the fault of my nose? The jury's out on that one. The jury is definitely back though on the Nikon F601 because the jury has come back and said this is when cameras started to get ugly. It also is an era where cameras started to get smart, and in that respect, this represents both of those things. But they also did start to get cheaply made. And look, this is one of the better ones, I think. It features matrix, center weighted, and spot metering. Its autofocus is still not good, but it's better than the N2020. Perhaps the most annoying thing about this one is the batteries. It takes these lithium CRP2 batteries that are quite expensive, difficult to get in lots of parts of the world. That's an incredibly frustrating aspect of this. Please, Nikon, you should have just stuck with LR44s or 4AAAs. That's a downside to this camera. It's one of the reasons I don't travel with it. Other than that, honestly, it's quite a capable camera. Very capable, quite ugly. Let's put you away because you're making my eyes hurt. But before I do that, I will just mention this is a great little lens. The 50mm f1.8 AFD works great on this camera, surprisingly fast as an autofocus lens. And again, it is a lens that I have tested out and used on this channel. Check out that video if you want to have a look at that. Let's put you away, ugly Nikon F601, but there's no real relief in sight yet because I have an even uglier camera, the Nikon F or N50. This is when ugliness really hit its peak. I mean, look at it. You could be forgiven for thinking that this was as well built as the F601 based on the weight of it, but no. And also this is where the cameras started to become quite limited. This can't meter with manual focus lenses. It's pretty much limited to your AFD lenses. And look, yes, it takes the same awful CRP2 batteries as the F601 as well. I don't quite know what to say about this. I have done a review of this as Nikon's ugliest camera, but look, it still kind of functions. It does the job. Remember, it's the glass that you attach to it that are going to probably define the picture more than anything else. But I will have to say that something like this does define your user experience. The 28 to 105 millimeter lens that's on there at the moment, though, is pretty good. And that's the one that I used in Colombo with the Nikon FG. On to the Nikon N55. This replaced the Nikon N50, and I had 3 of them at one point. That's mainly because 2 of them didn't work. And I have spoken in detail about this where I talk about my broken cameras, so do check that video out. The reason why I still use this one is because it is small, it is light, and it just does the job. I actually really like this camera, and I kind of feel like I shouldn't. It's the size and the lightness that makes it special. It is a perfect camera for traveling with. It doesn't do anything particularly special, but I will mention while we're here that this lens, the 28 to 80, is a really sharp lens. Is it fast? No. Is the bokeh nice? No, not particularly, but it's sharp and it does take a good photo. So look, this is something that will always have a place, and I will probably replace it if this one breaks. Will I replace this one though, the Nikon N60? In some respects, this is another really good camera. Look, let's just try and get our heads around the numbering and the naming of the Nikon cameras. Don't compare this to the N55. This is actually more like the N50. Certainly in styling, it's of the same generation, but it is a step up from the N50. I actually like the ergonomics on this one. It fits in the hand really nice. And one of the things I think about this one that makes it a step up from the N50 is that it has your traditional familiar dials on it rather than buttons. So it actually works with my muscle memory a lot more effectively. Let's make no bones about it though, this is still a crippled camera. Again, only works with your AFD lenses. You're stuck with those screw drive lenses. Not that there's anything wrong with that, because honestly, they're a nice match for a camera like this. A cheap camera, you can get cheap lenses. This would be a good foundation for a camera system if you just wanted something that was very simple. The Nikon N65 though is a definite step up. This is a camera that I use pretty much all the time. It's almost my everyday carry. It's almost as light as the N55, but it has one very distinct characteristic, and that is that it works with those AFS lenses. Now, the AFS lenses are the ones that actually have a motor in them. And this will work with them, and it will even autofocus with them. And that is a powerful thing when you think about the quality of some of those lenses that are still available, because it means that you're able to use things, for example, that were designed for digital f-mount cameras that really have slightly better optics than what you'd find in the AFDs. The F65, as I said, is a step up. And It is something that I've taken all over the world with me because it is almost as light as the N55, but it's much more versatile. I took it with me to Japan recently. I tested it with the Tamron 28 to 200mm and the Nikon 28mm, which is still attached to here. I'm not going to tell you much about this lens yet though, because it will be featured on the channel this year. In fact, I'm not going to actually pack this one away yet. This will be one of the last ones that I pack up because it'll also be one of the first ones that I'll open when I get to the new place. I promise you, you'll get to find out all about this camera and a couple of lens combinations. Very quickly, is there anything bad about this camera? Well, it's got a couple of little glitchy things that I don't particularly like. It has autofocus, but it doesn't let you manually switch between continuous and single autofocus. This is smart enough to tell whether the subject is moving or not, which is great, but it doesn't give you much control. I like to focus and recompose. And look, this does have AE and AF lock button. I think it's that one there on there. I think that's it anyway, but to be honest, I don't know because I never use that, and I don't want a system that is automatically going to lock the exposure and the focus at the same time. So in some respects, this is too dumb for me when I'm feeling smart, but for most of the time, it's actually just the right amount of smarts for this dumb photographer. So this is one that I tend to carry with me a lot. I'm going to talk very briefly now about the F75 and N75. That was an even bigger upgrade to the N65. And look, it has better metering, better focus, still tries to guess whether you're shooting a still or moving subject for you, but you can actually set the focus point. So that one gives you much more flexibility. I did cover that one before on the channel, and I also talked about it briefly in my broken camera section, that video. Have a look at that one, but it's already been packed. A step up from the N65, but really just a small step. And if that was a step up, the N75, this next one is a leap, my Nikon N80. Now, you can feel it when you're actually holding it in your hand. It has better build quality for a start. Now, it's bigger and heavier, but not by too much. It is substantial in your hand, but it gives you pretty much everything that I think you're going to need in a camera. It fixed all of the issues of the cut price 65 and 75 models. This one allows you to manually override the ISO for your film. How cool is that if you want to push or pull film, or you're using something that has the wrong DX label on it? Also, this doesn't wind the film out all of the way and spool backwards like some of the other cheaper ones. Now, that does have its advantages in that your shots are protected if you accidentally open the film door. But for someone like me who's used to developing my own film, having negatives that are all upside down and the wrong way around, it's a really frustrating and annoying thing. Oh, probably minorly frustrating, but it just does seem a point and shoot feature. This is a much more normal camera, and in most respects, it is my favorite Nikon autofocus film SLR, just because of that perfect combination of size, weight, power, and flexibility. Now, these are pretty much what I would call consumer cameras. Onto the enthusiast cameras. Firstly, sorry to those of you who are expecting me to run through a beauty queen lineup of Nikon F1s, F2s, F3s through to the Nikon F6. I don't honestly care about their flagship line of cameras. Early versions are very overpriced for what you get. It's that Nikon mystique. More, I think, than you tend to see with Canon. Here's a question. Are Nikon as a company maybe just a bit up themselves? The older ones are overpriced and awkward to use. Younger ones are overkill for me in terms of size, weight, and build quality. I live in Australia and everyone drives Land Cruisers, so I'm familiar with that kind of notion of wanting to have the biggest and the best. And look, it's fun watching the soccer mums try to park their four-wheel drive shopping trolleys at the local supermarket. It's about having things that are fit for purpose. This is probably, though, one of my biggest and chunkiest cameras, the Nikon F90X, and this is definitely a solid camera by anyone's measure. We have gone back in time to Nikon's awkward teenage years, though a definite advancement on the F50 and F601. This is a more grown-up kind of a camera. As Alan Partridge said at the coronation of King Charles, once considered something of an ugly duckling, he has now grown up to be, if not quite a beautiful swan, then a very fine goose. And this is probably a stately goose of an SLR, let's face it. It has all of the lens compatibility that you want. Unlike the F80, this one can actually meter for manual lenses, at least in the center weighted and spot modes, if not matrix metering. And it can handle those G lenses without the aperture ring. It wasn't a camera I was looking out for, but I saw it cheap at a local market, so I got it. This is the X version, known as the S version in the States, and it's an incremental step up from the non-X version. And by that I mean literally it's an incremental step up because it has more exposure increments as well as faster autofocus, better flash compatibility with AFD lenses. It's a lumbering honking goose though. Despite the higher number, this is older than the Nikon F55 through to 80 and it has a slightly quirky design. But really the beautiful swan of my film collection, even though I do quite like the 28 to 85 lens, and that's going to be packed with this one just for my own memory in case I'm looking for it later. The beautiful swan of my collection compared to this ugly duckling is my Nikon F100. Now this is the camera that you want if you want a serious camera. Yes, it's big and it's clunky, but it's not as big as an F5 or an F6. If you're a digital Nikon SLR shooter, this will be instantly familiar to you because it works exactly like a digital SLR. Everything about it is just muscle memory. Now, this is the camera that I don't really take out with me very much, but I do keep it at home and I use it when I'm willing to sacrifice bulk for quality. I use it to do things like test lenses, for example. So the Nikon F100 is in many respects my best camera. Is it my favorite? Well, like children, I tend to go through them depending on how well they're treating me at the time. But that is my Nikon film SLR collection, all packed and ready to move home. But before I go, here is a question for you. If, like me, you actually do use the cameras in your collection, when was the last time you checked the batteries in them? If I'm not going to be using a camera for a while, then I do try and take the batteries out. I also did have a system where I would use those little sticky tabs and put them on the cameras that still had batteries in them. But the problem is that they're the cameras you use the most, so you tend to take the tabs off and then forget about putting them on again. Now, if you know anything about cameras, you'll know the risks of corrosion that spent batteries cause. It's not just the gummed up battery compartments either, but that corrosion runs up the whole electrical circuit and kills the wiring in your camera. So this has been a good reminder to me, at least, to remove the batteries from the cameras that I'm not using. Treat this as a reminder for you to do the same. Maybe then I've saved another camera from death. Since they're not going to thank me in person, then you can do that by liking, sharing and commenting on this video. Tell me about your own film SLR experiences. Are you as much of a Nikon tragic as I am? I'm sure I'm not alone. Look, this is just an overview of my Nikon film SLR cameras, the ones that I own, and not an exhaustive list. Actually, I really hope it's not an exhaustive list. That would be really tragic. Still, I'm curious if there are any that you think I absolutely need. Looking at the box, we're starting to fill it up already. Looking at the cabinet, well, it's starting to thin out, but still a long way to go. And I haven't even started on the non-Nikon cameras or lenses yet. If you haven't done so yet, maybe you can think about subscribing and ringing that notification bell for more videos, because there are plenty more cameras to catalogue yet. And hey, once I'm settled into the new place, well, maybe I could make room for just a few more later.